Do you realize that if Max Verstappen wasn't in Formula One, Lewis Hamilton would be a 9-time champion?
How many crazy storylines would we have if he just didn't exist?
Let's find out.
Before we get into this episode, guys, check out turn1podcast.myshopify.com. The link is going to be down in the description. Any purchase you make in our online store that has a ton of F1 gear available, but we're going to add more, goes to support our work here at the podcast, and we can keep cranking out all of this content for you. So let us know in the comments what you want to see.
And make sure that you're getting ready for 2025 Scuderia Hamilton. It's coming to you faster than you know.
All right, let's get into the episode.
Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
So we just got done with the 2024 Australian Grand Prix. Max Verstappen DNF'd for the first time in, I don't know, 2 years. Ridiculous. But it kind of got us thinking, what if Max Verstappen was never in Formula One?
Yeah, so we're going to go season by season, I think starting around 2020, because that's when he really started to be a factor in Formula One, and just talk about how we would have talked about those years as if it was that time. I mean, we started getting into the sport around that time, started watching Drive to Survive, started watching the live races in 22-ish.
Yeah, 22.
And so we'll have a little bit more as we get into those seasons, but Max Verstappen is a dominant force. I think everybody knows I when I'm watching the races, I lean towards Red Bull to win just because I came in as a Max fan when he was the young gunslinger kid that just didn't care and was trying to beat Daniel Ricciardo and all that. But it's definitely an interesting, kind of hypothetical to say, how would Formula One look today if he wasn't a person? So where do you want to start?
I guess let's kick it off in, 2020 really is where he started to become a factor. He came in, third, fourth in the championship?
He got third in 2020. So this was still the Mercedes dominance. You have to get to 2021 before there's a legit contender to Mercedes power in both the drivers and constructors. It was clear that Max was an up-and-comer, and getting third, obviously, in 2020 was a big deal. But if you remove him from the picture, you now have Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas running away with the championship that year because Max got 2 victories. Both of those victories, one would have gone to Lewis, one would have gone to Valtteri. So you'd have given Mercedes 50-something more points. They would have been that much higher than Sergio Perez, who finished in 4th, now move him up to 3rd at 125 points. The craziest thing, Sergio Perez, what team was he on in 2020?
It wasn't Red Bull.
No, it wasn't.
No, he was at Racing Point.
So the Racing Point of Sergio Perez, he's now the new guy on the block.
Halfway through his career, if not at the tail end of it.
Racing Point competing with Mercedes. He's the only one that gets a win that's not a Mercedes that year.
Jeez.
So you're talking about leaving the COVID year, going into 2021. Maybe Sergio stays with Racing Point, which then becomes Aston Martin.
Yep.
I don't know if that was 2021 or the year after, but it does fold into that team. Would he have stayed if he's now getting podiums in the Drivers' Championship?
Not if Red Bull's still looking for a driver. Because in this scenario, yes, Max does not exist, but Sergio still goes to Red Bull.
That's true. Okay, good point.
So,
because Red Bull still step up.
Right. Also, Red Bull's still looking for who their next champion's going to be. So I guess, in this scenario, let's say Max is still on Red Bull, but it's not that he's non-existent in terms of he's out of F1, but let's say he's non-existent in terms of the championship fight. Let's say he's just another average driver. Let's say he's finishing 6th, 7th in races, 5th in races, but he's nowhere near the dominant level that we see today.
The Lance Stroll of a team, if you will.
The Daniel Kvyat, if you will.
Oh, no. That's a whole other episode for a whole other day. 2020 concludes. You would have Lewis winning his championship, which he did. You'd have Valtteri getting 2nd, which he did. And then you'd have Sergio Perez in Racing Point getting 3rd. Red Bull would be further down the list, nowhere to really be found. They wouldn't be a factor. It would now be the Racing Point v Mercedes battle going into 2021. 2021, though, is where it gets a little bit spicier. Walk me through... not the whole season, but what points were we looking at that last race, Abu Dhabi of 2021?
Well, Sergio fighting off Lewis Hamilton at the very end to make sure that Max gets that win, giving Max the world championships. First of all, if Max is a regular run-of-the-mill driver getting 5th and 6th, he's no longer a factor in that championship fight. Sergio would be higher in that championship fight, and Lewis would still 100% walk away with another world championship, making him the eight-time world champion, beating Michael Schumacher's record.
We still have the debate today about Lewis versus Michael Schumacher. I think it's really hard to compare the eras of Formula One. It's like people that try to compare LeBron and Michael Jordan. It's tough, right? It's different games and all that. And so you can match up championships, which is really the only value that we have. But if you give Lewis that 8th, he now skyrockets to the number one F1 driver of all time. You would have Valtteri getting 2nd in 2021. So Mercedes would still be the dominant force in 2021 without a question. But here is Sergio Perez getting 3rd place yet again.
His first year at Red Bull.
Now the lead driver at Red Bull.
Jeez.
That's crazy. And then you have Carlos Sainz coming in 4th, Lando Norris getting 5th. Like, it makes these people's career, just one spot up, makes their career look so much more fascinating than it is today. And these guys are having good, like, Sergio Perez is having a great career. Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris having great careers. Valtteri and Lewis obviously had fantastic careers. But if you take out the Max component in these seasons, it puts them in another level, basically, of career. The other thing that we would have missed in 2021, what do you remember from 2021? What sticks out to you most about that season of watching maybe Drive to Survive or going back and watching the races?
I mean, Max winning,
but every other race, Max and Lewis's battles.
Oh, yeah.
They were constantly taking each other out, running each other off track.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that the year where we have the famous picture of Max in Monza where his tire is propped up on top of Lewis Hamilton?
That's that year.
Wow.
So you would lose that battle, and it would go back to the Lewis-Valtteri thing, and Lewis would have just run away with it. So I caution the F1 fans that say Max running away with everything is detrimental to the sport. Maybe, but you very much had that with Lewis and Mercedes.
For years.
Minus the Nico year, if this continued without the Max turning the show around and changing things, that would be Lewis still.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Winning his 8th championship. But, again, the storyline here is Sergio Perez is the next guy.
He's next up.
Which is crazy.
Which leads us to 2022. So this is the year that Ferrari makes their awesome comeback in the World Championship battle. In the actual 2022 season, we see Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen going toe-to-toe throughout the entire, halfway through the season.
Half of the season,
yeah. Where they're battling for wins, and, now Charles is leading, now Max is leading, now Charles is leading. Take that out of the mix, and Ferrari, for the first half of the year, runs away with it. But then here comes Sergio Perez on the back half.
So, take Max out. Charles would have won 4 or 5 races in the first half of the year rather than the 3 that he actually did win. You would have him running away with it. Sergio, though, would have been really close, winning 3 or 4 races in the first half of the year.
Yeah. That's what I like to see.
It's insane. So you would have Charles, Sergio, and then George Russell. So your Mercedes pairing that has had a role of 7 or 8 years of dominance, and then adding in Valtteri halfway through that when they get rid of Nico, that is now completely out the window, and you have this whole next generation of F1 drivers that have stepped up in Sergio, Charles, George, and Carlos, all ahead of Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. That completely changes the landscape of F1. Because I think we all saw Max winning. Like, when he won in 2021, we're like, Max is the new guy.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there was a little bit of hint of Charles battling with that.
In 2022, yeah.
But you take Max out of the mix, you're like, what a change to F1.
Yeah, because now it's completely the up-and-comers. They have now taken over the role of, hey, we're here, we've arrived. Who's Valtteri? Who's Lewis? I don't know these guys. They're gone. They're old news.
And okay, so Mercedes, looking at them specifically, they moved Bottas away to bring in George Russell because, in my mind, they needed somebody that would compete with Max long term, and they thought George was that guy. do they do that if Max Verstappen is not the up-and-comer?
I think so, because Valtteri had been there for a while. Lewis has been there since the dawn of time. And you needed somebody to kind of take the reins for the future of Mercedes. You have these two guys that have been with the team for quite a bit of time. You need a fresh face. You need somebody who's eventually going to be the new face of that Mercedes team. You don't want to be stuck with the same team for too long. It gets stale. Eventually those guys age out and you have nobody there to take over.
Imagine the conversations too, where a lot of our conversations are around Charles v. Max, especially in 2022. But even prior to that, you could see Charles was an up-and-comer, obviously at Sauber, Alfa Romeo, moving into the Ferrari main driver role. That all happened pretty quickly for him. It was Charles versus Max. Which of these era of drivers, because they're both basically the same age, right?
Yeah, they came up karting together back in the incident days.
Them and George Russell are the next era of drivers. Sergio's a little bit older than them. Imagine instead of the conversation being around Charles and Max, it's Charles versus Sergio.
And here comes Checo with a late career strive for the championship.
It's a very Damon Hill-esque career path for Sergio Perez.
Yeah.
Kind of, meddling around midfield, suddenly has a breakout year with Racing Point where he gets a win, steals one from the dominant Mercedes team.
Catches the eye of Red Bull.
Moves into the Red Bull #1 spot.
Right.
And then proceeds to take over and win races for Red Bull.
You have a completely different story written here, because of the story very much so is the up-and-coming rising star of Max Verstappen and how he's going to take over the sport of Formula One. But now you have a new story being written, right? So now it's the story of where did this guy come from halfway through his career or at the end of his career, Checoperez climbing the stats, getting to the top of the ladder and fighting for championships.
Because at this point he'd be, early 30s? 30-ish?
You got me on that one.
Somewhere
I want to say that's probably right.
And Charles would be 22.
So who runs away, or not runs away with, but who wins the championship that year in 2022?
So 2022, if you take Max out, you have Charles getting the championship, followed by Sergio moving up to second from his previous third finishes against the Mercedes team.
2 straight seasons.
Then you have George Russell getting third, followed by Carlos Sainz. So Ferrari would have run away with the drivers and the constructors in 2022. And you know what? If you're a Ferrari fan, think about this like the NFL and football. If you can win one, that lasts for so long.
So what it would be is, with them winning, they would have won it basically with a dominant performance in the first half of the season and then losing all performance in the second half. So basically the suspense would not be, who's going to win the championship, but it would be, can Ferrari hold on to their title throughout the entirety of the season? Yeah,
as you have Sergio battling at the end of the year. That's when Sergio got one of his wins early, one of his wins late, but you would have had George and Sergio both kind of clawing their way up at the Ferrari teams in terms of their points.
Jeez.
It didn't help that Lewis didn't have a great run in 2022. Lewis really struggled with that car early on. And of course the wild card here is if you were taking Max out, we're taking Max's performance out. So if Max is just a middle of the road driver, how many points is he contributing to Red Bull?
Sure.
It's hard to say where Red Bull would have fallen.
Right. This is all speculation.
But it would have been Charles's year and Ferrari's year, and that would have put Ferrari back at the top of the mountain. Matteo Binotto would still be the team principal today if you get one.
If they win a championship? Absolutely.
That's wild.
Which brings us to 2023 and the story of Checo Perez.
This is the old timers club.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Forget the Ferrari storyline. Coming into 2023, all hype is behind Charles and Ferrari, right?
Yeah, we see the resurgence of Mercedes with Lewis Hamilton. We see here comes Fernando Alonso out of nowhere.
Yeah, so
Fernando Alonso would have some wins.
He would have a couple.
Oh,
he would have 1, 2, 3. He would have 3 wins.
That makes me so happy.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, 3 wins.
That makes me so incredibly happy.
Instead of 0. So yeah, let's say that Charles and Ferrari went in 22. You're coming into 23. All the hype train is behind Charles, Matteo, Ferrari is back. They're the dominant F1 team. And Sergio says, Sergio's going first, fourth, first in the first couple of races of 2023.
Jeez. Starts off the bat. Listen, if you're not first, you're last.
Meanwhile, Charles is only finishing 2 of those races, and Carlos is getting 4th through 6th points.
Which is a story that, just like in actuality, was told at the end of the 2022 season when we saw that Ferrari's durability was starting to go away, so they had to turn down the power of the engines, which led them to 2023, where it's like, hey, I don't think we can go full power on this thing. Otherwise, we're not going to have durability in the second half of the season. We're going to have to hold off. And
it would have been a slow decline from the middle of 22 into the start of 23.
God, to win a championship and then immediately the next season just get blown
to
out
barely hang on
by
to winning
Checoperez.
Yeah, so Checo comes out hot, and then of course that's 2023 is the year of Aston Martin. At least the first 2/3 of the year.
Oh yeah, they get way more points than they get now.
Yeah, so you have your leaders last season, 2023. Sergio Perez would win the championship for Red Bull, which that is what brings Red Bull back. Not 2021, not 2022, not 2023. Red Bull's on the map again as a team since 2014.
Which is wild because it's like we said, the rise of Checo Perez. So he goes 3rd at Racing Point, 3rd at Red Bull in his first year, 2nd at Red Bull in his second year, and now in his 3rd year, he finally claims the championship. But there's more to that 2023 story. For one, we have Checo getting championships. For two, we have Fernando getting wins for the first time in years. But who also gets an alarming amount of wins in 2023 for the first time in his career?
Ooh, Lando Norris.
Yeah, McLaren, because people forget at the second half of the season, McLaren picks up their pace dramatically, and who finishes in second behind Max Verstappen pretty dang frequently.
If you remove Max Verstappen from 2023, Sergio Perez would have had 6 wins. Lando Norris would have also had 6 wins.
And the only thing stopping him from winning that championship would have been how disgusting the beginning of that McLaren season was.
Doing the points, I think Lando would have finished 3rd. So I think it would have been Sergio, Lewis, Lando, then Fernando Alonso.
Which also, resurgence of Lewis Hamilton, he almost gets, what is that? That would be the 9th championship? Because he would win the 8th one in 2021 when him and Max fought, and instead it was a Lewis runaway in this scenario. And then he was nowhere in 2022. So in 2023, we have Lewis Hamilton almost winning his 9th championship. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been at least competitive throughout the year with him and Sergio. Because Sergio, even if you take away Max's win, Sergio wouldn't have run away with it. Like I said, it's 6 wins, which is good. Like 6 wins is awesome, don't get me wrong. But that's not running away with the season.
It's not 19 out of 22.
It's not 19. So if you're a guy winning 6 and Lewis wins 4 or 5 and Lando's winning 6 and Fernando's winning 3, that's a legit title race at that point.
We have a lot of race winners that season.
You
have Fernando Alonso winning, Sergio Perez winning, you'd have Lewis Hamilton winning, you would have Carlos Sainz winning.
Charles would have a win.
Lando Norris would have multiple wins. That's 6 different winners in that season.
I think that's all. Those are the only people that got second when Max got a... No, sorry. Oscar Piastri would have won the Japanese Grand Prix.
Whoa. In his rookie season, Oscar Piastri would have had a win.
Yeah, he got second when Max got first.
Now, granted, Lando would have had 6, but kudos to Oscar in your rookie season.
That's insane. Man, 2023 would have been such a good year without Max. And then again, like I said, it's the old timers club. We thought these guys were on the rise. We thought Charles, we thought Carlos, we thought George, we thought all these guys were the up and Lando. I mean, Lando is up there still, but we thought that, no. Here's Sergio in his 30s. Here's Lewis in his 40s. Here's Fernando in his 40s. They're in your top 4. They said we done messed around in 2022. 2023, we got this figured out. Aston Martin season, where'd they finish? 5th or 6th in 2023 at the end of it all, constructors wise? They'd be up a whole other spot.
In 2023?
Yeah.
Aston?
Yeah.
They finished like 4th, I thought.
Okay, they'd be up a whole other spot from wherever they finished.
Maybe it was 5th.
Yeah, because they fell off at the end of the year. Well, Lance Stroll really never helped.
McLaren took off at the end of the year.
And Lance never helped.
Well.
So then coming into 2024, you now have Lewis with 8 championships, fresh off a second place finish trying to battle for his 9th. You have Sergio getting his first victory after climbing the ranks through Racing Point and through the Red Bull system. You have Charles, who's dejected after winning 2022 only to come in fourth or fifth in. He would have been jumped by Lando, so I think he would have finished fifth in the standings either way if you take Max out, which is crazy. So going into 2024, it's fully up for grabs. Is it going to be another Sergio year? Is Lewis going to figure it out? I don't think Aston would figure it out. We saw their fall off.
Well, we see Ferrari with the fast car so far this season, so it would be a battle between Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc.
It'd be Sergio, Carlos, Lando, and Charles.
Yeah.
That's crazy. It'd be your Australian Grand Prix. But for the whole season. That's so exciting.
Because you would have 4 different people battling for a championship instead of another possible Max Verstappen runaway. Yeah, dude, that would be intense. First of all, the last 3 seasons would have been intense because starting 2022, the Ferrari runaway in the beginning half of the season, but then Sergio climbing his way back up with George Russell climbing his way back up. 2023 with the McLaren's win of 6 to Lando Norris, 1 Oscar Piastri, Fernando Alonso winning some, Charles Leclerc winning 1, Carlos Sainz winning some. It's up in the air.
The only year that would have been a runaway would have been 2021 still by Mercedes. That's the only year.
We would have had so many battles.
And I think the craziest thing in all this research that stood out to us, I would have bet a lot that in 2020 Sergio Perez did not finish 4th, and also that he didn't finish 4th with Racing Point.
He caught the eye of Red Bull somehow, and that was by getting a win in that Racing Point, but which I knew. What I didn't know, and that you told me whenever we were doing research on this, is that he finished 2nd in a race in that Racing Point vehicle in 2020.
Yeah.
Which blows my mind because how?
He got 2nd at the Turkish Grand Prix when Lewis won the race. So taking Max out doesn't actually impact that race, but he still would have had a race win. Legit straight up race win.
Let's see, that's weird though, because we have one-offs. You know, you'll have a Pierre Gasly winning in AlphaTauri. You'll have a Esteban Ocon wins at Alpine. And then we had checoperez winning at Racing Point. But then he got 2nd also in that season.
But it almost came out of nowhere because those were also his only 2 podiums of the year.
That makes more sense.
So he just had the back half of that year, he just had 2 outstanding performances, which we've seen from Sergio. Like, this career arc is not that like, it's crazy because it's Max right now, right? But it's not that crazy from a driver skill standpoint because Sergio is a legit good driver. If you can take a Racing Point car that he had and put it on a podium twice and get a race win against Lewis Hamilton in their peak, like 2020 Mercedes was a dominant car. The fact that he stole a win was insane. You go into 2022 or 2021, 22, and 23, Sergio's driver performance, I know he was on the fence of getting booted from Red Bull a couple of times with Christian Horner not liking his style, but he's good. And if you don't have Max, suddenly he looks like an elite level driver without being compared to Max.
It's definitely a weird concept to think about because you don't see Sergio Perez falling under that umbrella just because he's shadowed so much by Max Verstappen. But I mean, the stats don't lie, and if you were put the blinders on, if whenever you're watching a F1 race this season, last season, 2 seasons ago, it doesn't matter. If you just took an index card and covered up on the far left where it says number 1 Verstappen VER, just cover that up, and then from there on you actually watch the race, you'll actually be able to see where Sergio Perez lines up amongst all the other drivers. He's a good driver. He really is.
He was just, finishing like 3rd, 4th, or 5th when I guess Red Bull thought he should be finishing 2nd in every single race. And that's really hard to get 2 drivers on that level.
Oh, yeah, you're looking for another Max Verstappen, but with one being slightly better than the other. That's not the case.
You're looking for prime Lewis Hamilton to come race with prime Max Verstappen, and just lining those things up is really difficult. It's not going to happen. And you also don't want a guy that's competing with Max and stealing championships and stealing points because Max is your boy. The other thing that comes out of this, and we can kind of wrap up here, think about Ferrari. Okay, the driver market as we know it today. Lewis is going to Ferrari. Charles is still Ferrari's golden boy for some reason. If Lewis had won an 8th championship, his 7th with Mercedes, if Charles had won a championship with Ferrari with Carlos as his teammate, I don't think we have any of the major driver moves that we have today. I think Lewis is still with Mercedes. I think Charles and Carlos are still running the Ferrari team. Again, we talked about the Valtteri thing. Maybe Valtteri goes because they still want the young George Russell in there. But I don't think any of these teams make major moves because they don't have that Red Bull dominance that they're trying to break into.
Yeah,
they're all jockeying for position, and so you don't really want to throw a wrench into that. You only want to throw a wrench into it when you are clearly behind someone else, which is what Ferrari is doing, trying to catch up fully to Red Bull. They're saying, "Hey, let's bring in Lewis because this isn't working," and then Mercedes, Lewis is saying, I got to get out of Mercedes because they're not building me a car that's competitive. Maybe Ferrari can. If nothing else, I'll get a big paycheck out of it. Man, okay. Anything else you want to cover?
I think we about said it all.
Okay, let us know in the comments who would
Welcome
be...
to Turn 1,
Let's see, how do I want to phrase
a
this?
Formula One podcast.
How many more people could you get to watch F1 if you didn't have to explain Max Verstappen's dominance?
Guys, if you think that in 2026, first of all, they bring Sergio back in 2025, and then in 2026, they cut Max Verstappen and make Sergio the #1 driver, I think I'll die on that hill with you.
All right, guys, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.